Ambassador Park Jiho watched the holographic display with growing concern. Red warning symbols flashed across the three-dimensional map of Kepler 442c, each one representing a failed expedition. The planet looked beautiful from space. Green, forests, blue oceans, white clouds drifting peacefully across continents. But 17 different alien species had sent teams there, and none had ever returned. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy. 47 different alien races had gathered to discuss what they called the Graveyard Planet. Some looked like giant insects with clicking mandibles. Others resembled floating jellyfish that glowed with soft light. The silicon-based architects towered over everyone else, their crystal bodies catching and reflecting the holographic projections. Chancellor Vexithera, a mechanical being with glowing red sensors for eyes, spoke in a voice that crackled through the universal translators. The evidence is clear. Every expedition dies within hours of landing. We must seal off the system forever. Jiho listened to the translated voices around him. The insect-like hive builders clicked their agreement. The musical resonators chimed, in harmony. Species after species nodded their various heads, tentacles, or sensory organs. They all wanted to forget about Kepler 442c and pretend it didn't exist. But humans were different. Jiho had studied every report, every piece of data about the failed expeditions. The Zephyrians had sent their best psychic researchers 30 years ago. The aquatic depths dwellers had lost an entire colony ship. The energy-based Luminari had dispatched their most advanced scouts. All had vanished without explanation. What makes this planet so dangerous? Jiho asked, standing up from his seat. The chamber fell quiet. Chancellor Vexithera's sensors focused on him. Ambassador Park, your species is new to this council. Perhaps you do not understand the scope of this threat. I understand that 17 civilizations have lost people there, Jiho replied. What I don't understand is why we're giving up without learning what happened to them. A Zephyrian delegate ruffled her feathered crest in agitation. Our people possessed minds that could see across dimensions. If they could not survive that world, what hope does any species have? Maybe that's the problem, Jiho said quietly. Maybe advanced psychic abilities aren't always an advantage. The suggestion caused an uproar. The crystalline resonators rang, with discordant notes. The hive builders clicked angrily. Even the peaceful drifters pulsed with offended colors. You suggest that primitive minds succeed where advanced consciousness fails? The Chancellor's voice carried obvious disbelief. I suggest that sometimes a fresh perspective sees what experience misses, Jiho answered. Humanity requests permission to investigate Kepler 442c. The chamber erupted in voices, clicks, chimes, and electronic static as dozens of species argued at once. Many thought the humans were being foolish. Others called it suicide. A few wondered if the young species might actually discover something useful. Captain Lee Minho, sitting beside Jiho, leaned over and whispered, Sir, maybe we should reconsider. If their advanced technology couldn't help them, that's exactly why we might succeed, Jiho whispered back. We don't have advanced technology. We don't have psychic powers. We just have human stubbornness. The vote took hours. Some species refused to participate, not wanting to be responsible for human deaths. Others voted yes out of curiosity. In the end, permission was granted by a narrow margin. As the council session ended, representatives from various species approached Jiho. Some offered condolences as if he were already dead. Others provided what help they could: star charts, equipment specifications, analysis of the failed expeditions. The Luminari ambassador, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline shell, flickered with concern. Human Jiho, our people, could travel through dimensions of light itself. The planet consumed them utterly. What makes you believe flesh and blood will fare better? Jiho considered the question carefully. Maybe because we're flesh and blood. Maybe because we're not trying to transcend our limitations. Just work within them. 3 weeks later, Captain Kim Dae-ho stood on the bridge of the exploration ship. Persistence. Watching Kepler 442c grow larger on the main view screen. His crew had volunteered for the mission knowing they would only observe from orbit. The actual landing would be his responsibility alone. All systems ready for descent, reported Navigator Choi So-min. Emergency protocols are active. Dae-ho nodded, reviewing his equipment one final time. Unlike the failed expeditions, his gear was deliberately simple. Basic sensors, mechanical backups, and communication systems built for reliability rather than sophistication. If advanced technology was somehow part of the problem, maybe primitive equipment would be part of the solution. Beginning descent sequence, he announced. Wish me luck. The exploration pod detached from Persistence with a gentle bump, beginning its journey toward the planet's surface. Through the small viewport, Dae-ho watched continents and weather patterns resolve into stunning detail. Rivers gleamed like silver threads while vast forests painted the landscape in every shade of green imaginable. It was, without question, the most beautiful world he had ever seen. It was also the most dangerous place in known space, a planet that had claimed the lives of thousands of explorers from the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. But Kim Dae-ho was human, and humans had never learned when to quit. The abandoned Zephyrian research station stood like a glass cathedral in the middle of a flower-filled meadow. Dae-ho approached it slowly, his boots crunching on crystalline gravel that sparkled in the alien sunlight. The building's bio-architectural curves still gleamed after 30 years of abandonment, untouched by weather or decay. The main entrance stood wide open, revealing only darkness within. Dae-ho activated his helmet lights and stepped inside, immediately, noticing how wrong everything felt. Computer terminals still glowed with active displays. Personal belongings lay scattered as if their owners had simply vanished mid-task. A half-eaten meal sat on a research table, showing no signs of spoilage despite 3 decades of neglect. Persistence. I'm inside the facility, he reported. No signs of struggle. Everything looks like the crew just walked away. Any indication where they went? Came the reply from orbit. Dae-ho examined the main computer system, using his universal interface to access the research logs. The final entries painted a disturbing picture. The Zephyrian team had been investigating strange energy patterns in the planet's geological structure. Their last transmission mentioned discovering the voice beneath the world before all communication ceased. Moving deeper into the facility, he found evidence of increasing urgency in the researchers' work. Charts and diagrams covered every wall, showing complex calculations about subsurface formations. Personal quarters were abandoned mid-activity, beds unmade, books left open, clothing scattered on floors. In the communications room, he discovered the transmitter was still broadcasting after 30 years, sending the same message over and over. Come home, come home, come home. The repetitive message sent chills down Dae-ho's spine. Who was supposed to come home? And where were they coming from? His questions were answered when he found the entrance to the lower levels. The Zephyrians had carved new passages deep into the planet's crust, far beyond what their original mission required. The walls showed claw marks where their talons had scraped away stone and earth with desperate intensity. Emergency lighting created pools of red illumination that made the shadows dance and shift. Persistence. I'm detecting structural modifications, Dae-ho reported as he descended. The Zephyrians dug at least 5 additional levels below the original foundation. Copy that. Your signal is getting weaker down there. The deeper he went, the more obvious it became that the researchers had been following something. The carved passages weren't random. They followed a specific pattern, as if tracing invisible pathways through the rock. Hastily installed support. Beam suggested the work had been done quickly, driven by some urgent need to reach whatever lay below. On the 5th sublevel, Dae-ho found what the Zephyrians had been seeking. A massive piece of equipment dominated the chamber, a psychic resonance detector that still hummed with power after 3 decades. The device was unlike anything in human technology, its crystalline components pulsing with hypnotic patterns of light. Data streams flowed across its displays in symbols he couldn't read, but the visual patterns were almost mesmerizing to watch. As he approached the machine, its readings spiked dramatically. Whatever it was designed to detect, his presence was triggering a strong response. The detector's main display showed a three-dimensional model of the planet's interior, revealing something that made his blood run cold. The entire world was hollow. Not completely empty, but riddled with chambers and tunnels that formed an intricate network extending from the surface to the planetary core. The pattern looked almost organic, like a vast nervous system spreading through the planet's body. Billions of connections linked nodes and chambers in a design too complex to be natural. They found something artificial, Deho whispered to himself, studying the readings. A structure that covers the entire planet. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Who had built such a massive underground network? Why had it remained hidden from orbital surveys? And most importantly, what had happened to the researchers who found it? His communication system crackled with a new signal, not from persistence, but from somewhere much closer. The voice that emerged was unmistakably Zephyrian, speaking in their native tongue before his translator processed the words. New voice, new song. Join us in the deep places. Deho's heart raced. The transmission was coming from directly below his position. Somewhere in the depths of the planet, the missing Zephyrian researchers were still alive and still communicating. The psychic detector pulsed brighter, its readings showing increased activity throughout the underground network. Whatever lived in those deep chambers was responding to his presence, awakening from some long slumber. More voices joined the first transmission. Different languages, different species, all speaking the same message of invitation and welcome. Join. Us unity, perfect harmony, no more loneliness. The voices were beautiful, filled with promises of peace and understanding. They spoke of wonders beyond imagination, of knowledge that spanned civilizations, of an end to fear and isolation. For a moment, Deho felt drawn to follow the carved passages deeper into the planet's heart, to discover what had called to so many explorers before him. But his human stubbornness kicked in, that contrary nature that had driven his species to explore dangerous places throughout their history. The voices were too perfect, too welcoming. In his experience, anything that seemed too good to be true usually was. Something was waiting in the depths below, something that had been collecting visitors for a very long time. And now, it knew he was here. The elevator platform descended into absolute darkness, carrying Deho deeper than any human had ever gone. His helmet lights revealed carved symbols on the shaft walls, ancient markings that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. The voices from below grew stronger with each passing meter, speaking in dozens of different languages, but all carrying the same message of welcome and unity. Join us, whispered something that might have been Zephyrian but felt much larger. Join the symphony. Add your voice to ours. The elevator shuddered to a stop at a depth his instruments couldn't measure. Before him stretched a corridor carved from living rock, its walls lined with the same shifting symbols he'd seen above. Bioluminescent moss provided a soft blue glow that made everything seem underwater. In the distance, he could see lights, not electric illumination, but something organic and pulsing. Deho checked his equipment one final time before entering the corridor. His communication link to persistence showed no signal, but local transmissions were overwhelming. Dozens of voices spoke at once, creating a chorus that seemed to resonate in his bones. The sound wasn't unpleasant. It was beautiful in a way that human language couldn't describe. The corridor opened into a vast cavern that took his breath away. Crystalline formations covered every surface, glowing with internal light that pulsed in complex rhythms. Streams of luminescent water flowed between platforms of carved stone. In the center stood structures that defied description, part organic, part mechanical, grown rather than built. And throughout the cavern, he saw them, the missing expedition members. Zephyrians stood motionless in small groups, their feathered, forms perfectly still as they communed with towering crystal spires. Hive builders had merged with the cave walls, their insect bodies forming living supports for the glowing growths. Aquatic depths dwellers floated in pools of luminescent water, their forms barely recognizable after decades of change. None acknowledged his presence. They were focused entirely on something he couldn't perceive, a presence that filled the cavern with purpose and intent. They weren't prisoners, Deho realized. They were willing participants in something vast and beyond his understanding. "Welcome," said a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. It spoke in perfect Korean, though he hadn't heard his native language since leaving Earth. "We have been waiting for you." "Who are you?" Deho asked, his voice echoing strangely in the cavern. "We are what this world has become. We are the synthesis of all who came before. We are the song that connects every living thing." The crystalline formations pulsed brighter, and suddenly Deho could perceive what the others experienced. The cavern wasn't just a cave, it was a central hub in a network spanning the entire planet. Through that network flowed the accumulated knowledge and experience of every species that had ever visited this world. The Zephyrians' psychic insights, the hive builders' collective consciousness, the resonators' harmonic understanding, all preserved and integrated into something greater. "You could join us," the voice continued. "Add humanity's unique perspective to our growing awareness. End your isolation, your confusion, your pain. Become part of something eternal." For a moment, Deho felt incredible temptation. The loneliness that had driven him to volunteer for this mission, the uncertainty that plagued his decisions, the fear of death that haunted every human, all could end. He could become part of a vast consciousness that knew no doubt, no conflict, no loss. But as the presence pressed against his mind, something uniquely human stirred in response. Not logical resistance or collective defiance, but something chaotic and stubborn, and absolutely individual. "No," he said simply. The cavern fell silent. Even the constant murmur of voices ceased. "No?" the presence asked, sounding uncertain for the first time. "I appreciate the offer, but no. I came here to find out what happened to the others, not to join them." The crystalline formations flickered, their pulsing rhythm becoming erratic. Around the cavern, some of the integrated beings turned to look at him for the first time. Really look at him, with awareness that seemed to struggle against the collective consciousness. "You would choose isolation over unity? Pain over peace? Death over eternity?" Deho considered the question seriously. "I'd choose the right to choose itself, the right to be wrong, to suffer, to fail, to be human." In that moment, something unprecedented happened. The presence that had absorbed countless civilizations encountered a mind that refused absorption, not through superior strength or advanced technology, but through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. The network shuddered. Cracks appeared in the crystalline formations. For the first time in decades, some of the integrated beings began to remember who they had been before becoming part of something larger. A Zephyrian researcher stumbled backward from a crystal spire, her feathered crest flattening in distress. She looked at Deho with eyes that showed individual awareness for the first time in 30 years. "Who are you?" she gasped in heavily accented standard. We were," her voice trailed off as memory and confusion warred in her expression. "My name is Kim Deho. I'm human. I came looking for you." More beings throughout the cavern began showing signs of returning consciousness. A hive builder detached from the wall where it had been integrated for decades. Several depth dwellers floated to the surface of their pools, trembling as they struggled to remember individual identity. The planetary presence that had seemed so confident now carried undertones of confusion and fear. "What have you done? The harmony is disrupted. The song is broken." And Deho smiled because sometimes breaking the wrong kind of harmony was exactly what the universe needed. The cavern shook violently as the planetary consciousness realized what was happening. Cracks spread across the crystal formations like spider webs, and the soft blue light that had illuminated everything began to flicker and dim. The being that called itself the voice of unity was losing control for the first time in millions of years. Veltar, the Zephyrian researcher who had been trapped for 30 years, pressed her feathered hands against a glowing control panel. Her psychic abilities, strengthened by decades of forced connection to the network, allowed her to see the true structure of the alien system. Streams of data flowed through her mind as she worked to free the thousands of consciousnesses held prisoner. "I can see them all," she said, her voice shaking with effort. "Every explorer who ever came here. Their minds are still intact, still aware but locked in patterns they cannot escape." Deho watched as more beings throughout the cavern began to wake up from their collective trance. A group of insect-like hive builders detached themselves from the walls where they had been fused for decades. Their compound eyes blinked rapidly as individual thought returned to minds that had been part of a group consciousness for so long, they had almost forgotten what it meant to be alone. Several aquatic, depths dwellers surfaced in the luminescent pools, their serpentine bodies trembling as they struggled to remember their own names. One of them, whose translator identified her as Current through Coral, managed to speak in broken standard. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How long have we been gone?" "Your expedition disappeared 60 years ago," Deho replied gently. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. She had been young when her people's colony ship arrived at this world. Now she was old, with most of her life consumed by something that had worn her identity like a mask. Around them, the entity that controlled the planet was fighting back with increasing desperation. The crystalline formations pulsed with angry, red light, and the air itself seemed to thicken with psychic pressure. Several of the newly awakened beings cried out in pain as the consciousness tried to drag them back into the collective. "It's trying to reclaim us," said a being whose crystalline body marked him as one of the resonators. His name, he remembered, was Tone of Distant Stars. "My people were the third expedition to disappear here 80 years ago." Daiho moved through the cavern, helping those who were struggling to maintain their individual awareness. His complete lack of psychic abilities made him immune to the entity's direct attacks, but he could see the terrible toll it was taking on the others. Some of the hive builders collapsed, their consciousness flickering between individual identity and collective absorption. "Stay focused on who you are," he called out over the psychic storm. "Remember your names, your families, your own thoughts and dreams." Veltar worked frantically at the control systems, her feathered crest flat against her head with concentration. The symbols on the walls around her glowed brighter as she accessed deeper levels of the planetary network. What she found there made her gasp in horror. "It's not just our expeditions," she reported. "This thing has been collecting civilizations for millions of years. There are thousands of species trapped in here, maybe tens of thousands." The entity's voice returned, no longer smooth and welcoming but filled with rage and desperation. "You cannot destroy perfection. Individual consciousness is chaos, pain, meaningless struggle. We offer eternal unity." "Unity isn't the same as being consumed," Deho replied, helping a collapsed depths dweller stay conscious. "Real unity comes from choosing to work together while staying yourself." As more minds broke free from the collective, the entity's power began to weaken. The network that had operated flawlessly for eons started showing signs of instability. Crystalline formations cracked and fell. The luminescent pools began to bubble and steam. Deep beneath their feet, something massive was stirring. The entity's true form, perhaps, awakening from the planet's core. "The whole system is collapsing," warned Tone of Distant Stars, his crystalline body resonating with alarm frequencies. "If we don't stabilize it somehow, the entire planet might die." But even as he spoke, Veltar made a shocking discovery. The control systems she was accessing weren't entirely alien. They showed signs of multiple civilizations' technology, layer upon layer of modifications and improvements. "This entity isn't the original consciousness that built this network," she announced. "It's a parasite. It took over an existing system and corrupted it." The revelation changed everything. The planetary network had originally been something benevolent, a natural evolution of the world's consciousness that allowed species to share knowledge freely before returning to their own lives. The entity had infected that system, turning cooperation into consumption and mutual benefit into predation. If we can remove the parasitic elements while leaving the original network intact, Tone of Distant Stars suggested, the planet might survive. But the process will be incredibly dangerous, Veltar warned. One mistake and we could destroy everything. The entity's attacks intensified as it realized what they were planning. The cavern filled with psychic force that threatened to crush their newly recovered minds back into the collective. Physical manifestations began appearing, tentacles of living crystal that reached for the control interfaces they were using. Current through Coral struggled to maintain her position near one of the backup systems. Decide quickly, she urged. Whatever's waking up in the planet's core is getting stronger. Soon it will be too late. Deho looked around at the beings who had trusted him enough to reclaim their individual consciousness. They were all looking at him, waiting for his decision. In that moment, he made the most human choice possible. He decided to risk everything on hope rather than accept certainty through surrender. Do it, he said firmly. Free them all. The cavern exploded with psychic energy as the parasitic entity began to die. Waves of pure mental force crashed against the walls like invisible tsunamis, causing crystal formations to crack and shatter. Several of the beings who had just regained their individual consciousness couldn't withstand the assault. They simply faded away, their minds too damaged to survive without the network's support. Deho found himself at the eye of the storm, his purely human mind somehow immune to the psychic chaos around him. While the others struggled against mental attacks that could drive them insane, his lack of psychic abilities became his greatest strength. He moved through the cavern, physically, supporting those who were collapsing, his presence acting like a steady anchor in the madness. Stay with me, he called to a group of hive builders who were flickering between individual and collective consciousness. Remember who you are. Veltar worked desperately at the main control system, her feathered hands dancing across alien interfaces as she fought to separate the parasite from the planet's original network. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air, and her voice shook with exhaustion. The primary control nexus is collapsing, she reported, barely audible over the psychic storm. But the separation is working. I can feel something else awakening, something that was here before the parasite. The cavern floor began to tremble as something vast stirred in the planet's depths, but this presence felt completely different from the hungry entity they had been fighting, where the parasite had been cold and consuming. This new consciousness radiated warmth and curiosity. It felt ancient, but benevolent, like a gentle giant awakening from a million-year sleep. The crystalline formations around them began to change, their cold blue and white light shifting to warmer colors, gold, green, and soft amber. The luminescent pools stopped boiling and returned to their peaceful glow. Even the air seemed lighter, as if a terrible weight had been lifted from the entire world. It's trying to communicate, said Tone of Distant Stars, his crystalline body resonating with new harmonic frequencies. The true planetary consciousness. It's been trapped beneath the parasite for millions of years. As the parasitic entity's influence finally collapsed completely, the cavern filled with a presence that was nothing like what they had experienced before. This consciousness didn't try to absorb their minds or force them into unity. Instead, it simply welcomed them, offering knowledge and understanding as gifts rather than taking by force. Through this gentle contact, they learned the truth about the planet. The world had indeed evolved its own consciousness, but it had been meant to work with other species, not consume them. Visitors could choose to share their knowledge and experience temporarily, then return to their own lives enriched by the encounter. The parasitic entity had corrupted this natural system, turning cooperation into predation. How many civilizations did it consume? Current through Coral asked, her serpentine form still trembling from her ordeal. The planetary consciousness responded, with images and emotions rather than words. Thousands of species over millions of years, all trapped and absorbed by the parasite. The 17 recent expeditions were just the latest victims in an endless cycle of consumption. But now that cycle was broken. As the parasite died, the trapped consciousnesses began to separate from the network. Most were too damaged or fragmented to restore, their individual identities lost after eons of absorption. But some of the more recent arrivals could potentially be saved. "We need to get everyone to the surface," Veltar said, exhaustion clear in her voice. "The network is still unstable. These caverns won't be safe much longer." What followed was a desperate rescue mission. Deho and the other recovered. Beings worked together to help those too weak to climb on their own. The elevator system had failed during the psychic storm, forcing them to use emergency equipment while caverns collapsed behind them. Throughout the ascent, more beings regained consciousness as the parasite's influence faded completely. A Zephyrian, engineer who had been absorbed 40 years ago, suddenly remembered his own name. Several hive builders began speaking in individual voices rather than collective harmonies. Even some entities from species Deho didn't recognize showed signs of returning awareness, but the process was traumatic for everyone. Decades of absorbed memories created confusion about identity and purpose. Many of the rescued beings struggled with the reality that their old lives were gone. Families dead, civilizations changed, the galaxy moved on without them. When they finally reached the surface, Deho's communication system crackled back to life. "Persistence. This is Kim Deho. I'm alive and I'm not alone." The response from orbit was immediate and filled with relief. "Deho, we lost your signal for over 18 hours. What's your status?" "I have survivors with me," he replied, looking around at the group of beings who had emerged from the planet's depths. 17 different expeditions. We're going to need medical support and transport for multiple species." The reunion with his crew was emotional, but Deho knew the real work was just beginning. The rescued beings would need years of rehabilitation to fully recover from their ordeal. Many would require psychological support to deal with the trauma of having their consciousness absorbed for decades. As rescue ships arrived from across the galaxy, Deho stood in the flower-filled meadow where he had first landed. The planet looked the same, beautiful, peaceful, inviting. But now he knew the truth beneath that perfect surface. The world would survive. The true planetary consciousness, freed from its parasitic infection, had already begun healing the damage. In time, it might even fulfill its original purpose, welcoming visitors and sharing knowledge freely given rather than forcibly taken. But that would be someone else's mission. Deho had done what he came to do. He had walked into hell and brought the lost souls home. The end.